happiness is, in fact, I was just, trying to, understand the lyrics, and it kind of reminded me of the tragic passing of Scott Weiland. And it's like, has that sort of the low undertone and the brilliantly phrased style, which actually reminded me of Scott. So it's more like let's say, a compliment to your already versatile vocals.
Well, Happiness 3, that's a funny thing, that song, because that song's been around for so long. I mean, I wrote that originally in 2003.
Oh, my God.
And it was one of the songs I wrote for what I thought was going to be the soundtrack to a movie script I wrote with my friend called Deadwing.
Mm-hmm.
And when we wrote that script, I naively thought we're definitely going to get this film made. And, of course, it proved a lot harder than we expected. But at that time, I wrote a whole bunch of songs, not for any band or any project particularly, except for I thought they would be in the soundtrack to this movie. And of course, some of those songs were recorded by Porcupine Tree on the Deadwing album.
Right.
Another two songs were recorded for Inside Henty's, one called Collecting Space. And this is the last of the songs that I originally wrote with that Deadwing film soundtrack in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's surprising to me how much it seems to fit with the same themes of Hand.Cannot.Erase,
Right.
Again, it's very much a song about living in the city, about feeling isolated and lonely in the city. And it's a song that never seems to have found a home until now. So finally, the 4.5 project gave me the opportunity to bring this song forward. And I think the reason I've always sort of rejected it is because I felt it was almost too commercial in a way, too kind of
too radio friendly kind of.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a strange thing to say. You'd think someone like me would kind of seize anything that had a chance of being played on the radio. But I'm always a little suspicious when I write something that seems more accessible, because I'm not sure it's the thing I do best, But actually, I'm very proud of it, and and I guess it's a great pop song at the end of the day.
Absolutely true. And over the period of time, right from the Porcupine Tree to Blackfield to solo albums, you've crossed and exploited the progressive musical spectrum like to a maximum possible extent, and I still know that you have a lot more to do. So, is there anything left to be explored from your perspective?
Well, I have to say it does get more difficult with each album. I mean, I'm very keen on the idea that every album has a very distinct personality of its own. I don't like the idea of repeating myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think even if you just take my 4 solo records, you can see they're all very different.
Right.
And I like that. In some ways, it makes life very difficult for me, and it makes life difficult for my record company and my management, is that when you're always kind of changing your sound, it's hard to market that kind of artist. But that's the kind of artist I am, and if I can call myself an artist. And so I think in many ways, the first problem I have to solve whenever I approach a new project is, what am I going to do that's different? What am I going to do that will make this album have a different personality to the previous one or the previous ones? And I'm going through that right now, because I'm just beginning to think about what will be my next step. And the simple answer is I don't really know. I've got vague ideas that I want to do something perhaps even more contemporary, bring in some more electronic sound, maybe some heavy guitars again, maybe focus a lot more on melody.
Mm-hmm.
But those are very vague, abstract ideas right now, and the simple answer is I won't know until I start trying to create. Yeah.
Right. And do you ever feel like revisiting the heavier parts, like for instance, we had on the Fear the Dark Planet, where we had some progressive metal sound in it. Do you are you done with it? Like, no, there's a lot more than metal, or it's something which you might kind of reconnect down the road?
Okay, here's my thoughts. I do like heavy guitars. I like heavy guitar sounds, as you know, because you've mentioned one of the albums perhaps that I explored that the most on. Honestly, I feel that progressive metal is right now one of the most over overused
Yeah.
musical vocabularies that there is. There are too many progressive metal bands. I mean, there doesn't seem to be a week that goes by without another 10 progressive metal groups coming along.
Right.
Now, I like progressive metal. Listen, Meshuggah for a long time was one of my favorite bands. Opeth is, I think, extraordinary.
Yeah.
But those bands have been around for a long time now, and I think the problem is that there comes a point where it's difficult to make a sound using such a limited musical vocabulary which has any degree of freshness or originality to it.
Right.
Now, for me personally, I felt that when we got to the end of Porcupine Tree, there was nothing left for me to say using the metal vocabulary.
Right.
But having said that, I've made a lot of music in the last few years, and I think now I could imagine certainly using heavier sounds again. And in fact, I mentioned to you a minute ago, one of the things I'm thinking of is perhaps bringing back
heavy guitars,
some heavy guitar sounds, but to bring them into the context of the music that I'm making now.
Right. And
hopefully do it in a way that will seem fresh, because I think it is hard to sound fresh when you... That metal guitar sound is very... It's almost overused.
Yeah, it's kind of predictable.
It's predictable. It's got to the point where actually it almost doesn't sound heavy anymore.
Right.
Because there was a time when the sound of a heavy guitar, really brutal heavy guitar, had a power. I think back to things like Rain in Blood by Slayer. The first time I heard that, it blew my head off.
Right.
But I think the sound of metal music now is so familiar to everyone that I think it's lost a lot of its power, and that is, I think, a reason to sometimes, try other things.
Right.
And I made a record with my friend Michael from Opeth a few years ago called Storm Corrosion.
Yeah.
Yeah, where we deliberately went in the complete opposite direction.
Absolutely.
To try and make music that would be incredibly dark and brutal, but by using actually a lot of acoustic sounds, and almost rejecting the traditional heavy musical vocabulary. And I think that was an interesting experiment too. I don't know whether it worked, but it was an interesting experiment.
It did, but is that going to happen again? Do we have a new Storm Corrosion, or is it still the end of Porcupine Tree? What's with these two projects now?
I would love to do another Storm Corrosion album, and I know Michael would too, but we're not, we talked about it, we're not putting any pressure on ourselves.
Okay.
I think the thing is with the first album is that no one knew we were making it, and we just made it very much, in a fairly selfish way, really, just to please ourselves. And I think we would approach it in a similar way. So if we started to make music, we wouldn't put any pressure on ourselves to say we are making an album,
Right.
If we felt the music was good enough and original enough, then we would release it. And so I think that inevitably will definitely happen at some point, yeah.
And Porcupine Tree?
Well, I've never closed the door completely,
right.
But I felt Porcupine Tree had kind of done what it was supposed to do, and we made 10 records in however many, 15 years.
Yeah.
And I think by the end we'd kind of, a bit like what I was saying before about the metal sound, I think we kind of exhausted the possibilities of that particular band and that lineup. And I think it was important for me to work with other musicians and work with. But you know what? There may come a day when we get back together and make at least one more record. I've never ruled that out completely.
It sounds good. And before we conclude, what about India? Have you ever thought of coming? I know you obviously played with Porcupine Tree, but bring your solo band here, because people are dying to see you live.
I know, and I you know what? I would love to come and play in India. And actually, we had a show penciled in for this coming tour. Mm-hmm. And the problem is, my show is quite complex. It's quite intricate to stage. And one of the problems we have is getting the visual equipment. Now, I know a lot of fans are going to say, and I totally understand, I know a lot of fans are going to say, fuck all the visuals, we just want to hear you play those songs. We don't care about the films. But to me, it's important that I give 100% of the show or not at all.
Right.
And listen, we will find a way. We just have to find a way to be able to put on the whole production and the whole show with the films, the quadraphonic sound. If I come to India, I want to give absolutely everything.
Human experience.
I want the whole experience. I don't want sort of like half the experience. And I know that's frustrating for the fans. Listen, it's frustrating for me because the only time I went to India, I absolutely loved it, and I couldn't wait to come back, and I can't wait to come back. So keep your fingers crossed. Every day we are looking at trying to find a way to do this.